The 20th century brought many new technological innovations to the lives of many people. Technology played a big part in the wars fought, including World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, and the Cold War. These are some of the life-changing events of the 20th century through the eyes of the Skinner, Cochran, LeBlanc, Simpson, Lightsey, and Duke family. At the very beginning of the 20th century, the Boxer Rebellion was still happening. It took place in China and started because of an uprising that opposed foreign imperialism and Christianity. American, British, Russian, French, Italian, and Japanese soldiers were sent to subdue the rebellion. After the Boxer Rebellion was over, it sped up the process of China becoming a republic. While the Boxer Rebellion was going on, the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, were hard at work discovering the secrets of flight. On the morning of December 17, 1903, the Wright Flyer first flew successfully with a human on board, the first time a human ever flew. After this accomplishment, the brothers worked hard to try and perfect their design for a more practical plane. This was a great advancement to technology in the 20th century and influenced new travel. In 1914, the world experienced one of the biggest wars known to mankind, also known as the War to End All Wars, or World War I. After the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, everyone was dragged into the war because of mutual alliances. Imperialism, militarism, and nationalism also had a role to play in the start of the war. This was the first war to experience the use of trenches, resulting in a stalemate. On Christmas Eve, 1914, there was an unofficial truce called on the Western Front, and songs were sung between the German and British soldiers. On November 11, 1918, an armistice with Germany was signed to end World War I. Even though the Ottoman Empire was busy fighting the rest of the world during World War I, seeing as they were one of the Central Powers, they were also busy devising a secret plan to murder the Armenians. The Armenians were treated like second-class citizens because of their religion, Christianity, and they demanded more rights. Instead, the Young Turks decided to kill the Armenians and disable them from having offspring through genocide.
Going into the 1920s, things began to change. On August 18th of 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, giving all women the right to vote. From the beginning, women fought to attain the right to vote, and their work had essentially paid off. Getting to this point took a lot of protests, lobbying, and rallies from women everywhere. After the 19th Amendment was ratified, an astounding number of women voters were seen at the polls. Women then had a say in how their country was to be run. Because of the perseverance seen by women of earlier generations, the future of women was changed for the better.
What a marvelous age we live in.
Giving women the right to vote was not the only positive aspect of the 1920s. Entertainment was booming, and people of that time were itching to try out the new technological innovations. For some, technological advances such as the radio were the only form of news they had, limiting the level of understanding or even information that the population was given. This is why the technology of the 20s became so important, as it helped create a more informed and more happy population of people. In 1923, talking movies were invented. The idea of having words spoken out of a screen to an audience of people was astounding. The 1927 movie The Jazz Singer was the first feature-length motion picture with the dialogue, and the audiences were raving over it. Although a multitude of people were excited about the idea of talking films, or talkies, there were others who were skeptical. Many skeptics doubted that the popularity of talkies would last. However, with the release of The Jazz Singer, talkies began attaining great popularity and grew to be something people looked forward to and loved. In addition to the talkies, the inventions of the public radio and car radio were soon to follow in years 1925 and 1928. Before the public radio, people didn't quite have a hold on what was going on in the world around them. Radio provided a new way for people to interact with each other. In addition to this, it also united the nation and helped citizens stay informed. Although the 20s held a time of fun and peace, in the 1930s people of the nation were forced to experience some darker days. Black Friday of 1929 would pave the way for a series of cataclysmic days for those in the U.S. and surrounding countries. The first effect of the crash of the stock market was the Great Depression of 1930. The Great Depression is still known as a time of utter despair for people of the 30s. Because of bad planning and misuse of money, the Great Depression caused thousands to lose their jobs and struggle to make a living or to even survive. Even the invention of the AC in 1932 couldn't provide happiness for too long. Multiple deaths were seen as crime rates went up and tensions arose. Despite all the hardship and struggle seen in the 30s, towards the 40s the country would only have to face more, as on the day of September 1st, 1939, the world entered World War II.
The war in Europe began in September 1939 when Germany, under Chancellor Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. However, World War II only began for the United States on December 7, 1941. The United States was pushed into the war when Japan attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 7th in Hawaii, followed shortly after by Hitler declaring war on the United States. This had a major impact on the people of the United States. Although World War II brought many benefits to the U.S. economy, it also brought upon one of the most tragic events in history, the Holocaust, which began in 1941. During the Holocaust, approximately 11 million lives were lost because of a racial prejudice against Jews and other various races. The Nazis developed the final solution, which was a plan to get rid of all Jews. They decided the most efficient way of doing this was to set up concentration camps to exterminate their existence. Although the Holocaust did not affect the U.S. directly, it had an intense emotional impact on society. D-Day occurred on June 6, 1944, in which 160,000 Allied troops landed along a 50-mile stretch of heavily fortified French coastline to fight Nazi Germany on the beaches of Normandy, France. This was expected to be a major victory for the U.S. and Allied troops. On June 6, the Allies gained a foothold in Normandy. The D-Day cost was more than 9,000 Allied soldiers, but more than 100,000 soldiers began the march across Europe to defeat Hitler. As suspected, World War II officially ended a year after D-Day with the German surrender in 1945, which was followed by the suicide of Adolf Hitler that same year. These events brought upon an indescribable amount of prosperity and celebration within the U.S. During the final stages of World War II in 1945, the United States conducted 2 atomic bombings against the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. These 2 events are the only use of nuclear weapons in war to date. This event was very tragic and was debated for many years in the U.S. among citizens due to the ethical, legal, and military controversies. In 1949, it became evident that the Soviet Union was in possession of an atomic bomb. This event can be related to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In addition to this, the possession of an atomic bomb caused the world to go into a nuclear state. The Vietnam War began in 1954. After the rise to power of Ho Chi Minh and his Communist Viet Minh Party in North Vietnam, and continued with the Cold War as its setting. Over 3 million people were killed, including 58,000 Americans, in the Vietnam War, and more than half of this number was constituted by Vietnamese civilians. At the pinnacle of U.S. involvement, in 1969, more than 500,000 U.S. militants were involved in the conflict. As defiance in the U.S. with regards to the war increased, so did divisions between the fellow Americans. This defiance was prevalent both before and after Richard Nixon ordered the withdrawal of the U.S. forces in 1973. By 1975, Communist forces had seized control of Saigon, which ended the Vietnam War. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court demolished a separate but equal doctrine that had brought about state-sanctioned discriminations. In the course decade and a half that followed, civil rights activists used nonviolent protests and civil disobedience to bring about change, and the federal government made legislative headway with initiatives such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1968.
On August 28, 1963, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. gave his historic speech, "I Have a Dream," at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident
And though he was to be assassinated only a month later, President John F. Kennedy conferred with King on the speech. On November 22, 1963, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States of America, was assassinated in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. The President was then rushed to the emergency room, where he was served his last rites at 1 p.m. Then, at 2:38 p.m. the same day, the Vice President, Lyndon Baines Johnson, took the oath of office on Air Force One. An investigation swiftly followed, and results found by the Warren Commission stated that the president had been killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. The feminist movement really took a giant leap, however, in 1967, because feminists had organized in Chicago, where chapters of the National Organization for Women rallied for their recent adoption into the Bill of Rights. The amendment that was adopted was the Equal Rights Amendment, which covered maternity rights during employment, equal job training opportunities, and control over their own reproductive capacities. On July 20th, 1969, at 4:18 p.m., the lunar module touched the moon's surface. Neil Armstrong then reported that the Eagle has landed.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
This symbolized a step forward for the United States in front of the Soviet Union in the Cold War space race.
In 1972, the Watergate scandal began when a team of burglars had been arrested inside the offices of the Democratic National Committee in the Watergate office complex in Washington. This began the chain of events that would convulse Washington for 2 years, lead to the first resignation of a U.S. president, and change American politics forever. It was soon divulged that one of the burglars, James McCord, was on the payroll of President Nixon's re-election committee. He was not alone. Former CIA officer E. Howard Hunt and former FBI agent G. Gordon Liddy were both found guilty of assisting the burglars via walkie-talkies. Nixon finally succumbed to the pressure of the press and resigned. In 1973, the U.S. pulled out of Vietnam. The turning point in the war was when the U.S. cut military aid in South Vietnam in August 1974, resulting in the demoralization of the South Vietnamese army. After a long and treacherous war, the South Vietnamese army fell apart and a general panic ensued. Soon after, on April 30th, 1975, the South Vietnamese government surrendered. Soon after World War II, the Cold War started between the United States and the Soviet Union. Millions of dollars were sent to aid other countries during the war, trying to rebuild the economy. It led to the Korean War and the space race in 1951, with countries trying to be the first to land on the moon. The Berlin Wall was built in 1961, but it was only 3 short decades later when it was torn down. Communist countries had grown tired of the communist system. Mass demonstrations against the government in East Germany began at the end of September and took until November 1989. Eventually, the communist countries were able to decimate the Berlin Wall.
Beginning in the 1980s, a new spirit of Gorbachev's programs of glasnost, or openness, and perestroika, or restructuring. These programs took hold in both the USSR and Communist Eastern Europe. Individual republics within the USSR struggled for independence as former satellite nations broke free of Soviet control. The Soviet Union was incapable of withstanding these centralized changes and was officially abolished in December 1991. On April 19, 1995, Timothy McVeigh, an anti-government militant, set off a truck bomb at the Alfred P. Murray building in downtown Oklahoma City. The bomb crippled one side of the 9-story building and took 168 lives. McVeigh received the death penalty for his crimes. Only a few years later, on April 20th, in 1999, a massacre occurred in Littleton, Colorado's Columbine High School, leaving 15 dead. The culprits were 2 of high school's very own students, Eric Harris, age 18, and Dylan Klebold, age 17, and took 12 students' lives in less than 20 minutes. The massacre ended when Harris and Klebold took their own lives. The massacre resulted in a national debate on how to prevent gun violence in schools and a horde of new security in high schools.